Now, I caught up with former Prime Minister Scott Morrison a bit earlier this afternoon. I spoke with him about the major news that America will immediately begin testing nuclear weapons. And he also, in this interview, he intervenes in the net zero debate dividing the coalition. He says what he thinks needs to happen. Here's our exclusive interview. Scott Morrison, thank you so much for your time. We've seen the announcement this afternoon, our time, from the President of the United States that he's planning to restart nuclear weapons testing for the first time since 1992. What's your view on this? Is this about Trump showcasing America's strength?
At this point, I don't think we really know the details of what he's proposing, whether it's delivery systems or any and all of the above, and perhaps there'll be further details that will come forward. So whether it's a restarting of things that were going on 40, 50 years ago, well, we don't really know. So I think it's wise not to leap too far ahead as to what this means in practice. But obviously, the president has had a very clear narrative about peace through strength. And when you look at his statement on Truth Social, it makes a pretty strong reference to the size of the US arsenal, and it's a timely reminder when the Russians are flexing their muscles on this front, and things regarding China are quite opaque. I'm not suggesting they're conducting tests, but they're certainly forward-leaning when it comes to systems and the delivery systems in particular, and developing those technologies. So, I think you take it in line with many of the things that we hear, but I think there is an overriding sort of narrative that he has consistently projected, and that is the United States is a great military power. He says this fairly regularly.
But if he did go ahead with the testing, and he says he will do so immediately, would you have any concerns about that?
Well, I just don't think there's a lot of merit in speculating. I mean, it's not clear what he is actually proposing and how much beyond what the normal routine process is that they do across the systems that deliver these types of weapons. So let's just see what as Donald Trump likes to say, let's just see what happens. Let's just see what happens.
The net zero issue is dividing the coalition at the moment. You committed to the target when you were Prime Minister and Barnaby Joyce was deputy. Has your position on this issue now changed?
Times have changed. I think that's significant. I mean, back in 2021, Joe Biden was in the White House. Australia was becoming increasingly isolated when it came to this issue. COP26 was coming forward. We were negotiating trade deals with the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom had a very forward-leading view on this. Japan had made a similar commitment. And there was increasing concerns and the reality of a capital strike against Australia out of major investment banks and others. And that was not something Australia could afford at that time. And so there were some pragmatic decisions made. But I should stress that the decision we took at the time was not to legislate, was not to introduce any regulations that would bind or mandate or people's choices or tax or do any of these things. Our policy was that we would continue to invest in technology. And it was always our view that technology was the answer to lower emissions energy in the future. And we had an all of the above approach to that. And so that remains actually my position. Now, 2050, I'm pretty certain is going to push right. And I think globally that's going to be increasingly recognised. And I think that's just a practical realisation. I think the government will come to terms with that at some point in the future. So the problem with this debate, Sharri, is frankly, it's so cliched and it's so binary. And the answer is not at either extreme. And that's where so much of the politics likes to force itself. Angus Taylor and I had a very pragmatic policy. We didn't legislate it. We were never going to legislate it. We didn't think we should legislate it. The government decided to do that, and they decided to have a much more ambitious set of targets in the early stage. And that's what is driving what we're now seeing in our energy market.
So just to clarify your position, you do not think it should be legislated, but do you still think the coalition should keep the aspirational 2050 target of net zero?
I don't think 2050 is probably any longer achievable. And 2050, you can pick any date, pick 2060. I mean, Narendra Modi picked 2070. Others picked 2040. It's a statement of direction, not destination, I think. And, should policy seek to achieve the goals of affordability, scalability, reliability, and lower emissions? Yes, I think it should. But should that be done by destroying your economy and doing it at any cost in an unrealistic time frame, particularly in the short term? No, I don't. I never have. The problem is that position doesn't fit neatly into what you get from either of the extremes. So you end up getting cancelled by both.
But isn't this also a political problem? How do you deal with the teal seats? The Liberal Party needs to recover so many seats in this area. And the current thinking, whether it's accurate or not, the current thinking is that it would be impossible to win back those teal seats if net zero by 2050 is abandoned.
It's about a direction about whether you think emissions should be reduced as part of the energy mix over time. And I think if the coalition would take a view, and particularly the Liberal Party would take a view that emissions reduction was no longer part of the policy mix, well, I think that would not reflect where we've been as a party for a very, very long time. And that is part of the policy mix, in my view, at least. It was certainly part of the policy mix in all of the governments I was part of, including the one I led. It was, Tony Abbott's policy, it was Malcolm Turnbull's policy, it was my policy. And so, walking back from even seeing that as a policy goal, I think would mark a very stark change in direction. But simply admitting to the practical reality that meeting something by 2050 is unlikely to occur, and not to be bound by that as some sort of mandatory shackled arrangement. I don't see that as walking back from emissions reduction being part of the policy mix at all. Yeah. And it's important that in something as complex as this, that we just don't get drawn into this what is quite a boring polarity in this debate, because it doesn't help. Emissions fell under our government, and they fell actually more than they're falling now. They fell when Donald Trump pulled out of Paris. The US, Australia achieved greater reductions than Canada and New Zealand, who under their leaders ran around the world chastising everybody for their climate policies. But in places like Australia and the United States, that we were pursuing practical policies, we were working to achieve all of these things. And so now the challenge is to understand that with AI, I mean, if you go back to 2021, in 2021, when we all met in Glasgow, the idea that hyperscaler Mag 7 companies would now be bringing the investment into data centers, and more importantly, the hundreds of billions that they'll be investing in energy technology to power them, well, no one would have believed you. And that was only 2021. ChatGPT wasn't even, it was in development, but it certainly wasn't what it is today. And so all of those policies back then was about trying to draw investment into new energy technology. Well, that's happening. The hyperscalers are doing it, which is why Bill Gates is saying there's no need for this government-regulated premium to attract investment. Jeff Bezos wants to solve it. So he's going to spend a lot of money doing that. And it's always been my view that when there's enough capital put against that problem in the private sector, they'll crack it. Yeah. And we won't even be talking about it.
Do you think we need to lift the nuclear prohibition in Australia?
Of course, absolutely. Yes, that is the smartest policy, I think, on energy is all of the above. You don't rule things out. You don't say, oh, that can't happen and that can't happen. There's some practical realities of capital markets. If you want to get finance to build a coal-fired power station at the moment, I think you'll struggle. That's what the markets are saying. They're not investing in it. But on gas turbines and things like that, yeah. On nuclear, particularly small modular, we haven't seen those in practice yet, even in the United States. I mean, if you go to Texas, you'll see two things. You'll see acres of solar panels, but you'll also see the most pro-small modular nuclear reactor jurisdiction in the entire world.
Just final question on the division in the coalition at the moment. The famous saying is disunity is death. Do you have a message to those who are publicly undermining the leader, Susan Lee?
I'm not going to. I won't even sort of accept the premise of the question. I'll leave others to commentate on those things. But what is true is that when we can't pretend this isn't a difficult issue. It is, and so they're working it out. And sometimes that process can look a little messy. But it is important that they do work it out and that they come together. And I think they know that. I remember back between 2007 and 2013, we were in opposition. Got pretty messy back then too. You'll recall you were there too, Sharri. But we worked it out. We came together. We got unified, and we ended that government, the Labor government. Well, it can happen again. And this time it's a new generation that has to do that. They don't need people like me coming and telling them what to do, and that's not what I'm seeking to do. I'm simply reflecting on the fact that if people are feeling in any way constrained by the decision we took in 2021, I've just sought to clarify, well, why we did that. Times are very different now. The world's looking very different. And so they've got to look at the issue afresh, and I hope take a very practical way as to how they can bring a liberal solution to what is still a very real challenge and a very real problem.
All right, Scott Morrison, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sharri. Good to talk to you.